The first note was only a few words on a receipt, folded in half and tucked under my windshield wiper. I like your red jacket. It was a boring Tuesday, gray and close, the kind of day where the air feels heavy. I stood there in the parking lot with my grocery bag digging into my fingers and my keys clenched tight. I told myself it was nothing. Kids, maybe. A prank. I kept the note anyway because throwing it away felt like admitting it mattered. I wore that jacket every day. Bright red, cheap nylon, a color you can spot across a crowd. I liked that about it. Suddenly I didn't. At home, I slid the deadbolt in the chain and leaned my forehead against the door until my heartbeat slowed. My apartment sat over an alley that never slept. Bottles clinked. Someone shouted a joke I couldn't make out. A siren drifted and faded. I told myself to stop being dramatic. I ate cereal standing up and watched a couple fight across the courtyard with the window open, like I always did. That night I put the note in a drawer, under a stack of takeout menus and a broken tape measure. I told myself I wasn't going to look at it again. 2 days later, there was another one. Same receipt paper, different handwriting, a little neater. You always pick 2 lemons. One soft, one firm. Like you don't trust yourself yet. I felt something cold right in the center of my chest. I tried to think back to the last time I bought lemons. I could picture the yellow pyramid on the metal rack, my hand pressing each one. I could not picture who else was there, and the space where a face should be felt like a hole. I took the bus to the station and sat with my bag on my lap. Every time someone shifted in their seat, I looked up. Every time the brakes squealed, I flinched. When I got to work, I showed the note to Marta in the break room. She smiled because she smiled at everything first. Then she read the note again, and her forehead wrinkled. "Who do you think it is?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe someone from the store. Maybe nothing. Nothing doesn't know how you shop for lemons." She was right, but I needed her to be wrong. We stocked shelves until the scent of cardboard and coffee blurred into one. Our manager, Doug, made a joke about how maybe I had a secret admirer, and I laughed, because that was the script. When I clocked out, Marta walked me to my car. She said, "Text me when you get home." I mean it. I did. She sent back a string of knives and hearts. It made me laugh out loud in my empty kitchen. Then I shoved a chair under the door handle like you see in movies and slept on the couch with the TV on low so that the light moved across the walls. And I could tell myself it was only the TV. After a week of nothing, I took the chair away. I folded my red jacket over the dining chair. I decided I was being dramatic. I even told Marta I was going to stop thinking about it. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Sure," and then told me a story about a cat she used to have that always knew when an earthquake was coming. "Just saying," she said. "Bodies know." I didn't see the third note at first. It was stuck under my doormat. I only noticed because my shoe snagged on a corner when I came home. I bent down and peeled it free. This one was longer. The letters were thin and tall like they'd been stretched. "You shouldn't leave the chain off. It's like you're asking for trouble. But maybe you like trouble." I locked the door and stood with my back against it. The apartment smelled like old toast and lemon cleaner. I felt the walls lean in. I called Marta and read the note out loud. She told me to call the police. I said they were not going to do anything about slipped notes. You never know, she said. Ask for a patrol car to cruise by tonight. I did. I felt stupid. The voice on the line was calm and bored and promised me nothing, and told me to save the notes and install a camera if I could. After I hung up, I sat at the table with the 3 notes in a row. Red jacket, lemons, chain. My life sketched in small, mean strokes. I put fresh batteries in the smoke detector because it was something I could do with my hands. It blinked once, green. I made a list of the people who might know my jacket, my lemons, my chain. I thought of the cashier who always wore a bracelet that said hope in chunky letters, the old man who bought the same brand of canned fish and asked for paper instead of plastic, the kid who skated in the lot even when we told him not to. I thought of Doug, who called me kiddo, and of the new stock guy, Parker, who never met my eyes. That night I dreamed of a door that wouldn't close. I woke to my phone whistling from the kitchen, a text from a number I didn't know. Why did you stop wearing the jacket? The red made you easy to find, but I find you anyway. I felt like my lungs had water in them. I sat there with the blue light on my face, and that sentence like a nail. I went to the bathroom and threw up. I called Marta. She answered in a whisper. What's wrong? I read the text. I don't know why I whispered too, as if he could hear. Transfer it, she said. Forward it. Save everything. Can I come over? I looked at my door. The chain hung loose against the wood. No, I said. It's late. I'm okay. I'll go to the station tomorrow. You're not okay, she said. Don't be brave for me. I'm not, I said. I'm tired. We were both quiet. She said, keep your lights on. Then, I'm going to call you in the morning. If you don't pick up, I'm calling the police. I kept my lights on. At some point, I fell asleep in the chair by the door. In my dream, the door opened and I couldn't move my legs. In the morning, there was a scratch on the paint near the chain, a short white scar in the wood, like someone had slid something flat between the door and the frame and tested the give. I put my hand over it. The paint flaked. I put a piece of tape over it like a bandage so I wouldn't have to see it. At the station, they gave me a file number and a brochure about staying safe that read like it was printed for teenagers. Don't walk alone at night. Tell a friend where you're going. Change your route. Trust your instincts. Get a dog. The officer who took my statement asked if I had any enemies, as if enemy was a normal thing to have. He said, you might consider taking a break from social media. And I laughed because I had not posted anything in 6 months. He said, okay, well, keep a record. If anything escalates, call us. Escalates. That word sat with me all day like a stone in my stomach. It made me think of a building on fire floor by floor. Marta made me promise to stay with her that night. I said no again because if he was watching, I did not want him to follow me to her place. I smiled, told her I was fine, and hated how easy the lie sounded, like I'd been practicing it. I checked my mail from the box in the lobby. Coupons, a postcard from a dentist I didn't know, and an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo printed on cheap paper. Me, from behind, walking toward my building with my head down, and my red jacket loose at the shoulders. It had to be weeks old. A shadow from a tree slanted across my back, across the bottom edge, in pen. Nice posture. That night I shoved my dresser against the door. It left a gouge in the floorboards, and I didn't care. When you choose fear, it multiplies. It changes how you carry your body. It changes how you hear things. The elevator's rumble became footsteps. A slammed car door was a gunshot. The FX logo in the corner of my TV looked like a pair of eyes. And every man on the street stood out to me as if lit from within, suspect by default. The next morning there was another photo under my mat. It was my bedroom window from the alley. My blinds needed dusting. A sliver of my ceiling lamp showed. The angle made it clear the photo had been taken from below. The note this time: I like how you leave the light on when you pretend to sleep. I cried then. Ugly, open-mouthed crying, sitting on my own floor with a postcard of my life in my hands, proof that someone stood out there and looked up at me. I called Marta. I didn't even say hello. She said, "I'm coming." And I said no, and she said, "I'm already in the car." I waited by the peephole and watched shapes blur past. The hallway smelled like bleach. When she knocked, she said, "It's me." And then, in case that sounded like a trick, she sang a line from a stupid song we used to make fun of together. I slid the chain, opened the door an inch, then more. She moved past me and looked around like she might catch something still in the air. She picked up the photo. She said a lot of words in a short time, and then she stopped because none of it helped. We sat on the floor and drank water, and then coffee, and then water again. We made a plan. I was going to stay at her place for a while. We would move the dresser back. I would pack a bag. We would change the lock. She called a guy she knew who did locks, and we waited by the window like we were expecting a parade. When the lock guy came, he said someone had shaved the plate around the deadbolt. Very careful job. Not a crowbar. Something thinner. "Whoever did this wanted in without you knowing," he said. He replaced the whole handle and bolted in a new strike plate. He talked like it was any other day. I wanted to believe it was. When he left, he patted his pockets for his receipt book, and I wanted to grab his arm and say, "Don't go," but I didn't. We finished packing. Marta carried my bag and a small box of notes and photos. I took the stupid red jacket, because throwing it away felt like losing. We stepped into the hall and almost ran into the neighbor across from me, Tara, who raised an eyebrow and asked what the party was about. I said we were just cleaning. She looked at the lock and said, "You should talk to the landlord." And I wanted to punch the words out of her mouth. We made it down the stairs and out the front. The alley felt like a throat with bad breath. I moved fast. Halfway to Marta's car, I saw something on my windshield. A receipt folded under the wiper. I froze. For a second, my brain went blank and white. It was my old receipt from the first note. No, that wasn't possible. I leaned in. The receipt had my signature from 3 weeks ago for dish soap and eggs and lemons. The handwriting under it was different again. The letters thick. A felt tip marker that bled through. "You never texted me back." "What is it?" Marta asked. I turned the receipt toward her. Her mouth tightened. She plucked it off and pocketed it. "Get in," she said. We drove with the radio low. I kept checking the side mirror. When we stopped at a light, a car pulled up on my side. The driver was a woman eating yogurt, not looking at me. Behind her, a man in a cap. No eyes. Another car. No eyes. I stared until the light changed and kept staring after because the habit had taken hold. I don't know what I hoped to catch. A stare. A smile. A sign. Marta's place was the top floor of a building that used to be a school. High ceilings, creaky floors, a chalkboard still hanging in the kitchen with grocery lists scrawled across it. Her sofa folded out. She put a heavy flashlight on the coffee table like a centerpiece. She asked where I wanted to put my notes and photos, and I said, the freezer. And then I laughed at myself. She put them on top of the fridge instead. High ground. We tried not to talk about him. We failed. She told me about a podcast she'd listened to, about a guy who wore a neighbor's clothes for months and took pictures of himself in them. I told her to shut up. She laughed. We watched a police procedural where the detectives always got there in time, even when they didn't. And that helped. At some point, the quiet in her apartment felt different. It took me a second to hear it. A thin squeal, not loud, not close. We both looked at the window. It was just wind in the frame. My heart was still sprinting. Marta got up to brush her teeth. I sat with the flashlight and the TV noise. I picked up my phone. A message notification sat on the lock screen with a number I didn't know. The preview said, "You and your friend make a nice picture." Something in me turned to sand. I opened the message. It was a photo of Marta through her own window, her face tipped up toward the bathroom mirror. I could see the back of my head in the reflection, blurred. He was close enough to see us through the glass. He knew where she lived. I sucked in a breath and called her name like it had weight. She came out with toothpaste on her lip. I held the phone up. Her face went flat. She reached for the blinds and pulled them down hard. She said, "We're going to the police now." "It's late," I said. Even then I thought about not wanting to bother people. It makes me sick to think about that. "Good," she said. "Let's bother them." We took the elevator because the stairs felt like a place someone could wait. In the lobby, the night attendant lifted a hand, then dropped it when he saw our faces. We stepped into the empty street. The air cut my throat. I scanned everything. A car idled at the corner, lights on. A couple walked past with their heads close. A man smoked and watched nothing. We got into Marta's car. She drove fast. My phone buzzed again. No words this time. Just a single emoji. The little face with its finger to its mouth, shushing. At the station, we showed the messages and the photos. A different officer listened. He was young and didn't meet my eyes and made notes on a tablet. He said, "We'll file it. We can send a car by your places. Do you have any idea who this might be?" I wanted to shake him. I said the words I felt I was supposed to say. "No, I don't know. Maybe someone from work. Maybe a neighbor." He nodded. He handed me another brochure. He said, "I can't tell you what to do, but a self-defense class is never a bad idea." We left with a pair of paper case numbers and a rolling nausea. Marta touched my elbow. "He's not going to win," she said. I didn't know what winning meant. The next morning I borrowed a hoodie from her and went to work. She didn't like it, but I needed to do something normal. The fluorescent light made my head ache. Parker was in the back, slicing open boxes. He looked up at me, and for a split second I was sure it was him. The way he paused before he smiled, like he was picking a face to put on. Then he waved and said, "Morning," and I felt ridiculous. Doug made a joke about how I looked like a high school kid in my too big hoodie. "Red jacket at the cleaners?" he asked. I said I was taking a break from Red. Around lunch, the store went quiet, that lull where the coffee is old and the chips are all stocked. I found a note under the register mat, folded neat. My hand shook as I opened it. "You hide badly." Below the words was a smile drawn with a shaky line. I looked around. An old woman surveyed the peanut butter like it contained answers. A kid in a school uniform counted out coins. Doug was on the phone in his office with his door open, saying something about hours. My skin prickled like a blush I couldn't stop. I slipped the note into my pocket and went to the bathroom and locked the door, and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. When I came out, Marta wasn't at the register. I did a slow circle of the store. I found her by the stockroom door, talking to a man I didn't know. He had a leather jacket and tired, flat eyes. He was asking too many questions about our closing time and whether the back door stayed locked. Marta shrugged like she shrugged at everything. I got between them, not obvious, but there. He smiled and left. After he was gone, she said, "Sales representative." That's what his card said. Creepy vibe, though. The day felt long, rubbery, and then it snapped. Marta walked me to my car at closing. The lot was almost empty. A light at the far corner flickered. We stood by my door and I said, "Come over after? We'll make pasta and hate watch something." She said she was tired. Tomorrow for sure. And she kissed my cheek, and her lip left a tiny slick spot that caught the light. The moment felt normal. I clung to it. She got into her car. I got into mine. I texted her as I always did when I pulled out. Home in 20. She sent back a heart and a knife and a lemon. My chest warmed. 3 blocks later, a different sound cut the night. Not a siren. Not a horn. Something low and wrong, like a big animal. I looked in the mirror. The shape of cars behind me shifted. Lights jerked. The sound went again. I told myself it was nothing. I drove on. I reeled in my thoughts like fishing line. The light at the next intersection was long. I was the only car. The glove box rattled. My phone rang in the cup holder. Marta. I smiled, ready to say, "You're supposed to let me call first or it messes up our system," because we had made a joke out of everything, and that felt like safety. I answered and heard nothing. Just air. I said her name. Then I heard a small sound, like someone's mouth opening and closing without words. And then the phone went dead. I told myself the call dropped. I told myself she butt dialed. I told myself not to be dramatic. I took the next right, looped around, and headed toward her street, because telling yourself something doesn't make your hands obey. A police car passed me, slow. Another one came from the opposite direction. My mouth dried out as if my body wanted to keep me from saying anything. On Marta's block, lights slashed the brick. I pulled to the curb and got out too fast and left my door open. The air was cold and smelled like hot metal. There were 2 cars in the road and one on the curb. One of them was hers. The driver's side door hung open. Her purse lay on the seat. A trash can had tipped, trash spread like wet confetti. People had gathered in pockets, hands on their mouths. A woman said, "Jesus," like the word was a question. An officer put his hand out at me, palm flat. "Back," he said. I said, "My friend." He said, Back. There was a dark shape on the pavement beyond the cars. My brain did not want to make it into Marta. The shape had a wrong angle to it, like that was the main problem. Another officer crouched beside it. He had a clipboard in his hand. I hated him for that clipboard. Someone cried. I pushed my hand into my pocket and closed my fingers on the note from under the register mat. Something in my head said, "This is how he does it. He makes you carry his messages while he does his real work." A paramedic went still when he reached the shape. He looked up and shook his head once, a minimal movement, like he didn't want to spend the energy. Somebody vomited in the bushes. The air had the heavy feel it gets when a crowd has been shocked all at once and is now breathing too fast. A woman behind me said, "It was so fast." And another said, "I didn't see anyone." And a third said nothing at all. I heard myself say, I told her to come with me, but my mouth didn't believe it. An officer took my details because I kept trying to walk past him. He said I should sit. I said no. I stood there until the street emptied, and then I stood there a while longer. By the time I got home, the note in my pocket felt hot. I took it out and put it on the table with the others. I looked at my phone. No new messages. I typed one to Marta and deleted it. I called her and got her voicemail. Her voice bright and quick. "You know what to do." I couldn't. I sat on the floor with my back to the fridge and slid down until my tailbone hit hard. My phone buzzed. A new message from the number that had sent me the window photo. "You should have insisted." A second later, "She didn't listen. That's not my fault." Then, "Some people have to learn the hard way." I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and fell into the sink. I stepped around it like it was a live wire. I opened a drawer and took out the first thing my hand landed on, a screwdriver, and I went to the smoke detector and pried it off the ceiling. It popped free and dangled by a wire. Behind it was a small black dot that wasn't part of the unit. I stared. I pushed my fingernail at it. It moved slightly, against a spring. It was a camera lens. Someone had drilled a tiny hole and set a camera in my ceiling. Every time I had looked up at the blinking green light to reassure myself, I had looked at his eye. I sat down on the floor right there and laughed. It didn't sound like me. I pulled the wire out of the detector. The camera's tiny light went dark. The next day I brought the camera to the station. A different officer took it. He put it in a plastic bag. He asked for my phone and I handed it over like a limb. He said they would try to trace the number. He said I should stay with a friend. I almost asked which one. When I got home, Tara from across the hall was standing in the corridor with a takeout bag. She said, "I heard about your friend. I'm so sorry." Her face looked pinched, but I couldn't tell if it was sadness or excitement. She said, "Do you want to come over later?" I made soup. I said no. I said yes. I said I didn't know. She touched my arm and said, "I'll bring it to you." The day moved in jagged pieces. The landlord sent an email about heightened awareness. Doug left a message about taking as much time as I needed, and then added that he had to schedule next week, so if I could let him know today, that would be great. My mother called twice and left voicemails so full of the sound of her own worry that I couldn't bear to hear the words inside it. Late afternoon, I took trash down to the bins because doing a small thing that had an end point felt like victory. The alley was crowded with broken chairs and a mattress someone had leaned against the bricks. It smelled like sour beer and old rain. I lifted the lid on the bin and looked down at a bouquet of dead flowers, stems slimy, petals brown. On top of the bouquet was another photo, glossy this time, almost professional. Marta behind her counter at work, counting till money, her mouth pursed in a shape I recognized as her thinking face. She had never liked being photographed. I knew that because I did. I reached in and tried to pull the photo out without touching the flowers. I failed. Rotten water slicked my fingers. I wiped them on my jeans and then hated that my jeans had her on them. I pressed the photo against the side of the bin to scrape off a smear. It left a streak like old blood. I threw the photo back and slammed the lid. When I turned, someone was at the mouth of the alley. A man, a cap pulled low. I couldn't see his face. My body stepped back toward the door on its own. He stood there a second, then moved on. Just a man on a sidewalk, nowhere to be. Upstairs, I washed my hands until the hot water ran cool. Tara knocked and left a Tupperware container of soup on my doormat. I opened the door and picked it up, and the hallway smelled like boiled carrots. Under the container was a folded note, just a torn scrap, nothing like the others. It said, "Call me if you need anything." Her number. I stared at the digits until they blurred. I went inside and put the soup in the fridge and the note on the table. And then I sat and listened to the building breathe. He texted again after dark. You looked at the flowers. Then, she always hated those cheap bouquets. She thought they made dead people look staged. I didn't answer. He tried again. You think I don't watch? You think you are someone I could lose track of? A pause. I am good at this. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe the fact that everything else had failed to make him stop. I typed, "What do you want?" My thumb hovered. I pressed send. A full minute passed, then another. The ticking of the kitchen clock felt loud. Then, "I want you to hear me." "I hear you," I wrote. "I am listening." "You're not. You never are. You move through rooms like they exist for you. You never hold a door for anyone. You never look to see who is behind you. You don't deserve attention, and you take it anyway. If I had read those words in a book, I would have called them petty. In my kitchen, they chilled me more than any threat. He had noticed me in that small, mean way that comes from time spent. He had assigned great values to my kindness. He had ideas about my worth. You don't know me, I wrote, and hated myself as soon as I sent it, because it sounded exactly like a line from a show, and he would enjoy that. I know enough, he said. I know how you trip on the third stair if your hands are full. I know how you read the back of the cereal box even though you've read it before. I know how you pretend to like people you hate. I know how you stand in front of mirrors and practice expressions the way actors do. You are very, very easy. I didn't answer. I turned my phone face down and then up again. I waited for more. None came. The quiet felt worse. I slept on the couch with the lights on and the screwdriver under my pillow. Every time the building settled, I flinched. I saw Marta's face in my dreams, but not the face I knew. It was the face from the glossy photo, frozen mid-thought. And I wanted to warn her. But dreams don't allow warnings worth anything. She turned away and stayed turned. The next morning I knocked on Tara's door because I couldn't stand my own place. She answered quick, like she had been standing behind the door. She wore a big sweater and her hair in a messy knot that looked made to look messy. She said, "Come in," and moved aside. Her place smelled like cinnamon and disinfectant. The sink had no dishes. The shelves were lined with small plants in clean clay pots. She had an ashtray on the table with one cigarette butt placed in the center like a decoration. "I thought you didn't smoke," I said. I don't know why I said it. I don't know why it felt like proof of something. She shrugged. "Only when I'm anxious." "Are you okay?" "No," I said. It felt good to say it. I sat on her couch. She poured coffee into 2 cups, even though I hadn't asked. She had a way of moving like everything had been arranged in advance. "Do you think it's someone from the building?" she asked. "Because we can talk to the landlord together. He's a prick about everything, but if there's liability, he'll listen." "It could be anyone," I said. "That's the problem. It could be the guy who fixes the laundry machines. It could be the woman who leaves her hampers in the hall. It could be the kid with the skateboard. It could be you. It could be me." She made a face. "Not funny." "I wasn't trying to be," I said, and we sat in the beat after I said it, both a little startled by the truth in it. She touched my knee. I meant what I wrote. "Call me if you need anything," or just knock. Her eyes were steady on mine. "You shouldn't be alone." "I don't like burdening people," I said. She rolled her eyes. "Who told you that's what asking for help is? He wants you to pull the shades and stop talking. Don't give him that." I liked the way she said he. I liked turning him into a small word. We spent the morning together, like we were trying on friendship in fast forward. She showed me a crack in her ceiling that looked like a map of a country we didn't know. I told her about how the lock guy had said the plate had been shaved. She told me about a man who once sat across from her on the train and whispered compliments about her shoes for 20 minutes without moving his mouth. We laughed. It helped until the laughter thinned and revealed that we were still in the same place beneath it. Around noon, my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. A new number. A new message. "You make friends fast when you're scared." It's endearing. I stood and walked to the window, and Tara understood at once and pulled the blind aside with a finger and peered down. People moved in and out of the building across the street. A courier leaned his bike against a sign and tightened a strap. A woman with a stroller checked her phone. No one looked up. That felt like the point. He never had to hide. He had the crowd to hide him. I had to go to work because money is a stupid, malevolent metronome that doesn't pause for grief. Doug hugged me with one arm and told me to go home if I needed to. Parker asked about Marta with his mouth tight. "She was nice," he said, as if the world could be sorted into nice and the opposite. I stocked cereal and didn't read the backs. I smiled at customers and felt my face go brittle from the effort. I found myself turning toward the security mirror every few minutes to see my own head from a new angle, to prove to myself I still had a back. Late afternoon, a man came in with a baseball cap low on his brow. He walked the snack aisle, the canned food aisle, the aisle with the cleaning supplies, and never picked anything up. When I said, "Can I help you find something?" he said without looking at me, "Not yet," and then walked out, leaving the bell above the door to sing a single note. I stood there and felt cold and hot at once. I told Doug, and he said shit, and then said, "If you want to take your break, take it now," which was the same as saying he couldn't do anything. When I left at closing, the lot was almost empty again. I had that feeling of being watched that I had learned meant nothing, and also sometimes meant everything. I kept my keys between my fingers, because that is a thing you're told to do. I saw a shape moving at the edge of the lot, and my chest tightened, and then the shape resolved into the kid with the skateboard, who said, "Hey," and swerved around me. I wanted to apologize to him for what my body had done. In the car, I locked the doors and sat a moment. A tap on my window made me jump so hard the seatbelt caught in my throat. It was Doug, his face pale in the lot light. He mimed rolling down the window, and I did, an inch. "You okay?" he said. "You jumped." "Yeah," I said. "I'm jumpy." He nodded like he liked that I was human. "Someone left this in the office," he said, and held up an envelope. My name on the front, block letters, no stamp. He didn't hand it to me. Should I toss it? My mouth said yes before I could think. "Yes," I said. "If it's from him, I don't want it." My stomach twisted. Of course I wanted it. The part of me that had been trained like an animal wanted to know what the next instruction was. Doug said, "You sure?" I nodded. He shrugged and dropped the envelope into the trash bin near the cart return. It sat on top of fast food bags and a wadded paper towel. I watched it as if it might move on its own. Doug clapped the roof of my car and said, "See you," and walked away. I got out and fished the envelope out of the trash. I hated myself a little. I hated the piece of me that wanted to be told what to fear next. In the car, with the doors locked again, I slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper, a map of my neighborhood with a route traced in red marker. Starting at my building, looping past the park, cutting down behind the pharmacy, around the back of the school that was now Marta's building, and back again. Written at the bottom, "You walk in circles." I don't know why that detail undid me. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because something so basic felt like a judgment. I crumpled the paper and shoved it in the glove box. When I looked up, a man stood at the end of the row of cars, too far to see well. He raised his hand, slow, like a wave. I refused to be the kind of person who waved back. I put the car in gear and left. That night the building sighed and creaked and people walked the hall. A neighbor's TV talked about a bake sale like it was an emergency. I took a shower so hot I had to turn my face away from it. When I opened my bathroom door, steam bloomed into the hall. A new smell threaded through it. Metal, not blood. Clean metal, like pennies in a mouth. I stood very still and did the thing people tell you not to do in stories. I said, "Hello?" Because I am not a story. I am a person in a hallway, wet and naked, with a screwdriver on the sink and a heart making my ears buzz. And I needed to put something in the air. I moved down the hall. The bedroom door stood open. The window blind was down. The corner where my laundry basket sat looked more shadowed than it should. I took one more step, then another. My foot hit something. I looked down. A small pile of hair ties I'd thought I lost sat on the floor in a neat stack. A piece of blue thread linted one. On the bed, a single lemon, soft, with a thumbprint in its skin, dented. It broke me in a small way. I said, Stop. Very quiet. To no one. I did not sleep. I sat on the floor with my back to the dresser and the screwdriver in my hand and watched the bedroom doorway for a shadow that did not form. At dawn, the light made everything bland. I stood up slowly and my knees popped. I gathered the hair ties and threw them in the trash. I put the lemon on the table like evidence. At noon, an officer called me and said they had traced one of the messages to a prepaid phone purchased at a mall kiosk and used near my block. He said, "We're doing what we can." He said, "Don't engage with him by message anymore. It only encourages." I said I wouldn't. I didn't add that I already had. I thought of texting back something obscene. I didn't. The second murder belonged to a man I barely knew. His name was Malik, and he lived 2 floors below me, on the corner. He kept to himself and wore headphones in the elevator, and had once helped me carry a suitcase when I got stuck. I learned his name because it was shouted in the hall. Someone shouting for help. Horrible. Blunt. I put my hand on my door and didn't open it for a full 30 seconds while I thought about what it would mean to see something I could never unsee. Then I opened it because not opening it was worse. He was in the stairwell, slumped against the wall, sliding down in a slow, final way. The angle of his head was wrong. His shirt was dark and darker. A woman from the 4th floor was on her phone with her mouth open, not talking. A man I had never seen pressed both hands to the dark and said, "Stay with me." And I wanted to tell him that wasn't how staying worked. But that was what a person says. Someone had cut the power to the stairwell light. It flicked on and off. Time broke into strobe. Malik's hand twitched once, a movement that might have meant anything. At the bottom of the stairs on the landing, carved into the paint with something sharp, a word. Listen. The carving was deep and ragged. Flakes of paint curled like dead skin. I stared at the word because it was easier than staring at his face. The police came and turned us into versions of ourselves who give statements. I said I had heard shouting and then nothing. I said I had been in my apartment. I did not say I had stood with my hand on the door, thinking, what if I am not brave enough? I did not say I was already living with this man in my head. It felt like inviting him to sit on the couch. After, Tara knocked and asked if I wanted to sit in her place for a while. I said no. She said she would be next door if I needed. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it and tried to breathe slow. My phone buzzed. He was helpful once, wasn't he? When your bag was heavy. Did you thank him properly? You never do. I threw the phone into the laundry hamper, and it bounced out and skittered across the floor like a rat. I picked it up and put it in the freezer. The sticker on the door said to make sure the door closed fully. I pressed it until the magnet kissed. The quiet held. That night I dreamed of the word carved into the stairwell. In the dream, it moved. The letters rearranged and said my name. I woke with my teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. I had drooled on my pillow like a child. I sat up and licked my lips like tasting fear would teach me something. In the morning, I took the phone out of the freezer. The screen was fogged. It showed 12 new messages. I didn't open them. I put the phone face down and sat on the floor and ate cereal without milk, one flake at a time, as if that could become a ritual that kept me safe. When you get used to a certain level of threat, you stop noticing the hum of it and only notice the spikes. The next spike came while I was in the laundry room on the ground floor, sitting on a plastic chair and scrolling news I didn't read while my clothes spun in a damp circle. A man came in, young, big shoulders, earbuds. He pulled his clothes from a dryer and they smelled like detergent in a way that felt almost obscene. He glanced at me, no nod, looked away. Another man came in, smaller, older. He smiled. "Busy today," he said, though it wasn't. He put his basket down and then didn't do anything for a minute. He was waiting for me to look up again. I did. He said, "You live on 6, right?" I said, "No," because it felt like the right answer, even though it was. He laughed. "I've seen you around," he said. My washer clicked. I stood. The older man stepped back as if polite. The younger one took out his earbuds like he expected a show. I opened the machine. Inside, my clothes were neatly folded, each shirt squared, each sock tucked into its mate. Too neat to have happened by accident. On top, my red jacket, perfectly folded, a receipt tucked under the collar. We're not done. Not cutesy. Plain. The letters were short and blocky. A child could have printed them. The stack of clothes blocked my breath for a second. The room got small. The older man said, "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. I stacked the folded clothes into my basket because there was no way to argue with them. I put the red jacket on top because I was tired of pretending it didn't exist. I left the receipt in the pocket. I could not make new evidence out of the same old object one more time. In the hall, Tara was there, like she had sensed a shift in the air. "Walk you up?" she asked. I almost said no. The word hovered behind my teeth, a reflex I wasn't proud of. I said, "Yes." In the elevator, I smelled her cinnamon shampoo and wanted to press my face into her shoulder like a child. We stepped out into our hall. My door was ajar. The latch stuck sometimes. I never left it like that if I could help it. I stood there and could not make my foot move. Tara said my name in a tone like a taste. We pushed the door open together. The living room looked fine in the way rooms look fine when you are trying too hard to see what is wrong. Then I saw it. The lemon from my table sat on the back of my couch, balanced in a spot it could not have rolled to. A black line had been drawn around its middle like a belt. My brain took a second to assign shape to the line. A thin rubber band, a hair tie, one of mine. I don't know why the lemon was what made me say, "He has a key." After everything else, it could have been any number of ways in, but a lemon moving without force felt like a key. We checked the windows. We checked the shower. We checked the closet. We checked the stupid space under the bed that no adult can fit in, but that every fear can. He wasn't there, but that didn't help because he had been. I changed the locks again. The locksmith looked at me like he was thinking of charging a recurring fee, and then decided he didn't need the guilt. He swapped out the whole set. He said, "If you want me to add a second deadbolt, I can." Like it was a reasonable life to live, double locking yourself into your own space. I almost said yes. I didn't have the money. He gave me the bill, and his face made a shape when he saw my face. "Pay me half," he said. I wanted to hug him and also hit him. "Next time you can pay the rest," he said, and then realized he had said next time and swallowed and left. That night, I took the hair tie off the lemon and put the lemon in the trash and took the trash out. I walked all the way down to the big outside bins because I didn't want it in our hallway. At the bin, a cat sat on the rim and watched me with the blank, wide attention cats have. The bin was almost full. A hand touched my elbow, light. I turned so fast the world blurred. It was the kid with the skateboard. He held both hands up. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to creep." "It's okay," I said. And then, because it wasn't okay, "What are you doing?" He shrugged. "Waiting. Teenager for nothing." He nodded at the lemon in my hand. "Weird trash." "It's old," I said. He grinned. His teeth were too white for the alley. "Everything is," he said. He kicked the skateboard up into his hand and rolled away. I threw the lemon into the bin, and a second later heard it thud, dull. I went back inside and sat on my floor and pressed my palms to my eyes until colors washed through. When I took my hands away, the room had a new tilt that had nothing to do with my building, and everything to do with knowing someone wanted me to notice his placement of a piece of fruit. The messages stopped for 2 days, which was worse. I startled at every elevator ding and hissed at myself for it. I went to work and let the beeps of the scanner be the heartbeat I borrowed. Parker asked me if I wanted to grab a drink after shift to talk about all this, and I said no before he finished. Not because it was him, but because now everything was a trap. He flushed and said, "Sure," and I felt bad, and then told myself feeling bad was how it started. On the third morning, a small package waited at my door. Brown paper, no return address. I should have left it. I knew that, as surely as I knew my name. I carried it inside anyway. I put it on the table. I looked at it like it might blink. Then I opened it because the only way out was through. Inside was a stack of photos held together with a red rubber band. The top photo, my building's stairwell wall with the carved word. Next, my own back from the hallway angle, head tipped. Next, Marta from the side, lip gloss catching light. Next, Malik in the elevator, eyes down. Then a photo of me asleep on my couch, mouth open, hand on my stomach, the light on. The last one made my knees give. I sat hard. The final photo. A shot of my front door from 5 feet away, taken at a slight tilt. In the corner of the frame, a hand holding the camera. Pale. A small scar at the base of the thumb. I put the photos face down and spread my fingers and felt the table under them. The surface had a dent where I'd dropped a mug last year. I wanted to put my face on that dent and breathe into it. My phone buzzed. The freezer would have been too slow this time. I picked up. "You keep asking what I want." I hadn't. Not in that phrasing. Not in those words. But I had asked with every second of attention he stole. "I want you to be awake." "I am," I wrote, before I could stop myself. "Not like that," he said. "I want you to feel every time you look away from a person in pain. I want you to know that someone is always watching you when you think no one is. I want you to stop walking in circles and start seeing the corners. Who are you?" I wrote. He let the question sit a long time. The typing dots came and went, the way people learn to make you lean forward. "Someone you didn't hold the door for," he said. "Someone you didn't tip. Someone whose name you mispronounced and laughed. Someone who watched you count lemons when you thought you were alone." He was telling me it could be anyone, so it could be everyone. He was telling me the city was his costume. I stood. I went to the door. In the peephole, the hallway bent into a small fisheye world. empty. I opened the door and stepped out. The long runner carpet was faded where feet had moved for years. A scuff on the baseboard had the shape of a country again. Tara's door was closed, the peephole like a blind eye. The stairwell door was half open, stopped by a bad hinge. Down the hall, the elevator chimed. I took one step toward it, then two, then stopped. I went the other way, toward the stairs. On the landing, the carved word waited, a wound in paint. A piece of red rubber band lay at the base like a tongue. I stood and listened. Below, a footstep. Above, none. The building hum burrowed in my ears. I moved down one flight, then another. On the third landing, a smear on the wall, brown at the edges. Months old now. No smell. People avoided touching it. You could see where hands had hovered and found other places to press. One more flight and I heard a voice. Not words. A shape of sound like talking to a small child or a pet. I stopped. The voice came from the second floor landing. I took the last step slow. On the landing, Parker stood with his back to me, his hand on the knob of 2B. He wore a gray hoodie and a cap, and he was saying, "It's okay," and his voice was higher than at work. He turned when he heard me. He had the look people get when their face has to catch up to their brain. Surprise, then smoothing over. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" Something in me unclenched because I had wanted it to be him just to make the wanting stop. And now it had come to face and it wasn't. Or I didn't think it was. His eyes flicked to the screwdriver in my hand. I looked at the knob of 2B. A new lock plate. Clean screws. He followed my look. "My niece lives here," he said. "I promised to fix her door." "She let you?" I said. My voice sounded small. He nodded. He knocked quick, 2 beats. No answer. He knocked again. No answer. He put his ear against the door. He looked at me with a question I didn't want to answer. "Maybe she's at work," he said. "I'll come back." I stepped aside. He went up. I stayed where I was. I looked at the screwdriver, at my hand, at the carved word 2 floors up, at the door to 2B with its fresh plate, at the line of scuff where a shoe had hit the baseboard again and again. I felt like I was in the belly of the building and something had started to digest. Back in my place, Tara texted, "You good?" I wrote. "No," she wrote. "Come over." I didn't. I sat on the floor and pressed my back to the dresser and tried to count my breaths. At 12, my phone vibrated on the table and walked a little like a bug. I picked it up. "You're getting warmer," he wrote. "Not your choice of words," I wrote back, before I could stop myself. "Why not?" he wrote. "It's true." I thought of the hand in the photo, the small scar at the base of the thumb. I tried to conjure every hand I had seen in the last year. The lock guy's hand with its square nails, Doug's big hands, always in motion, Parker's fine hands, quick with box cutters, the night attendant's hands, always flat on his desk, Tara's hand on my knee, Marta's hands lifting me up when I crouched to straighten a bottom shelf and made a show of groaning like she was old. I had not looked at their hands to learn anything. I had looked to be polite. "What corners?" I wrote. "Tell me." "You have to see them," he said. "I've shown you so much. Show me more." A pause. "Take the jacket," he wrote. "Tonight. Walk. I will show you." "No," I wrote. "Do it yourself." If I do it, you won't be ready, he said. Put on the jacket. Go down. Turn right. Walk past the bins. Turn left at the mural with the dog. Don't look at the windows. Don't call anyone. If you call, I'll know. I stood. I put the phone in my pocket. I took my red jacket off the back of the chair. I held it a second and smelled something like old lemons and dust. I put it on. It felt like stepping into a version of myself I didn't like anymore. I locked my door. I left the chain off because if he had a key, it didn't matter. And if he didn't, the chain would only slow me when I came running back. In the hall, the air was a little too warm. Someone had propped the stairwell door with a catalog. I kicked it aside and let the door close behind me. I went down. My feet knew the steps. I took them anyway like they were new. The carved words slid by. The landing with the smear slid by. The second floor landing with 2B slid by. The first floor. The lobby. The night attendant lifted a hand and lowered it. I pushed out into the alley and the air smelled like wet cardboard. Right. Past the bins. Left at the mural with the dog. The mural was new, I realized. My brain had recorded it as old, because that made it easier to not see. The dog had 3 eyes. Someone had spray painted a crown over one. I turned left. The street narrowed. A delivery truck blocked most of the lane. I walked close to the wall. I didn't look up at the windows. I didn't call. I felt stupid and angry and a little thrilled. That last part shamed me. He texted, "Stop." I stopped. Turn. I turned. I was in the back of the block, facing the seams of buildings where brick meets old brick. The water stains made shapes my brain wanted to assign. A door stood open 2 inches in the wall of the building that used to be the school. A wedge of darkness. I recognized it. The service door to the basement where they kept broken desks and a bike rack and a furnace that always sounded like coughing. "Go in," he wrote. I stood still and time stretched thin and taut. I heard the cough of the furnace. I heard a bus exhale at the stop on the next street. I heard my own breath. I pushed the door. It swung. The dark inside was layered, not pure. A smell like chalk and old paper. Another smell under it like copper. My phone buzzed. 2 minutes, he wrote. If you don't, someone else will. Your choice. Someone else who? My mouth tasted like pennies. I stepped in because if I didn't and something happened anyway, I wouldn't survive the blame I would assign myself. The basement was colder. My jacket rustled loud. My shoes made small click noises on concrete. The light from the door reached 10 feet, then dropped. In the dark beyond it, a smaller light. Almost nothing. The red eye of a power strip. The faint glow of an exit sign that didn't exit anywhere. "Hello?" a voice said, and it wasn't his. It was mine. Automatic. Ridiculous. No answer. My phone buzzed. Straight ahead. 10 steps. Then right. 10 steps. 9. 8. At 6, a shape appeared. A stack of chairs. At 4, a table with a folded set of bleacher's legs like an animal at rest. At 2, the corner. A right turn like a throat. I turned. Another small light. My phone buzzed. Open the locker. A line of old metal lockers ran along the wall. Most hung open, doors buckled. One was shut, padlocked. The lock was small, cheap. "How?" I wrote. "Use the screwdriver. 3rd hole under the latch." I slid the tip in. I jimmied, the way I'd seen the lock guy do to my door, the motion I had tried to forget. The lock popped with a sound like a coin dropped in an empty room. The door swung open. Inside, a box. Same brown paper as the package on my table. On top of the box, a single pink plastic hair clip, the kind a child wears. I stared at it until it blurred. I lifted the box. It was heavier than I expected. Enough, I said aloud, to him, to me, to the furnace. I stepped back into the rectangle of light from the door. I carried the box out, into the alley, into air. My phone buzzed. Don't open it outside. He'll see. Who? I wrote. The one who always sees. Riddles. I kept walking. I turned my corner. I kept going. Up the stairs, into the hall, to my door. I put the box on the table like an offering. I stood and looked at it. I thought of Marta and Malik and the third stair and the lemon and the carved word and the locker and the dark and the small red light and the smell of chalk and copper. I peeled the tape. I lifted the lid. Inside was a neat bundle of things tied together with a strip of my red jacket, cut from the lining. The strip was thin. The cut was clean. My breath stuttered. On top of the bundle, a key ring with 6 keys. One had a plastic tag that said 2B. One had a piece of pink thread tied to it. One had the logo of our building's leasing office. One had a notch filed into its teeth in a way that made my stomach roll. Under the keys, a stack of folded papers. I picked them up. Old printouts of complaint emails I had sent to the landlord about noise, about the heat, about a leak in the ceiling. My own words, as if I had been writing my curriculum vitae for him without knowing. Under that, a map like the one from the envelope, but this one marked with names: Marta, Malik, Tara, Doug, Parker, attendant, lock guy. Each name circled, each circle numbered. My hand shook. A grid of tasks. A game. At the bottom of the box, a phone. Not mine. A cheap one. The kind you can buy with cash. It lit up when I touched it. A message on the lock screen. Turn around. I did. The peephole was dark, a circle of black. It took me a second to understand that meant someone had a finger over it from the other side. The dark at the peephole stayed steady. No flicker that would have been a blink. A finger pressed there doesn't move much. You learn small facts like that when you're scared. Your brain collects them like it's preparing for an exam that decides if you live. I didn't say anything. I put the box lid back on with my left hand and picked up the screwdriver with my right. I stepped sideways until my shoulder touched the wall. I hated that the old paint warmed under my skin. I held my breath until the same prickly noise rose in my ears that rises on planes, and then I let it out slow. The finger didn't move. Whoever was there wasn't adjusting to the weight. He had decided the kind of statue he wanted to be, and he was being it. The phone from the box buzzed again. Turn the handle. Not a please. Not a threat yet. He thought the command would do the job. I moved the screwdriver into my sleeve and jammed it up the cuff so it wouldn't clatter if I needed both hands. I walked backward into the kitchen and opened the drawer with the rubber bands and took 2. I put one around my wrist and threaded the other around my fingers, tight. I had no plan. I just wanted the feeling that I had done one thing on purpose. A second buzz. If I have to pick it, I will. A third. You know I can. That made my teeth hurt. He was not bluffing. I unlocked the door and turned the handle 1/2 inch. The pressure on the other side was gentle, steady, like a hand on your shoulder meant to calm you that only makes you lock your knees. Back up, I said. My voice didn't shake. I don't know why. Maybe the throat decides to help when your head can't. Back up or I yell. No answer. The pressure stayed. 2 steps, I said. I need to see you. Then I open. I heard fabric move. A slow shuffle like he wanted me to think he was reluctant. I waited 3 breaths and twitched the door, just enough to make the chain rattle. I had left the chain off earlier. I put it on now with a tiny click I hoped didn't carry, then slid the door an inch. The finger left the peephole and light came through like a reckoning. He had taped a rectangle of black paper over it. It hung a little crooked, one corner lifting. That was all. No eye waiting for my eye. Just an empty trick and my own body booming with blood because of it. Okay, I said, to the paper and the person in the empty hall. I'm not opening. The phone buzzed. Scream if you want. No one comes. I believe that. Not because my neighbors were monsters, but because we had all trained ourselves to pretend we were alone. That was part of the appeal of living stacked like this, the illusion of separation. The handle turned again, slow. The new lock held. The old wood groaned. A whisper of metal against metal sounded at the latch. Something thin slid in and felt for the notch. I stepped back and to the side and imagined the triangle the door would open into. I put my shoulder into the cool patch of wall beside the fridge. I didn't want to be in his sight line when the door blew. I didn't want my body to be the first thing he saw. The phone. Last chance. I wanted to write back something mean. I wanted to make a joke. I didn't. I pulled the screwdriver down my sleeve until the handle hit my palm. The latch clicked. This is how it happens, I thought. Not with a charge and a bang, but with a patient hand and a tool. The way you fix a shelf. The door swung an inch, 2, 3. It nudged the chain and the chain took the weight like a small brave thing. The paper over the peephole fluttered and dropped. A hand came in through the gap, just the fingers and the side of a thumb. Pale. A small scar at the base of it shaped like a crescent that had healed too smooth, like melted wax. The scar. My head did a useless flipbook of every hand I'd cataloged. This one fit too many of them because hands are not faces. But the scar made a small station in my mind, and my mind docked there. He reached for the chain. He had done this before. His fingers didn't fumble. He lifted it and rode the slack up the track toward the peg. Quick. I stepped hard and slammed the door against his hand. The chain snapped tight, a high ring. A short sound leaked from him, not pain exactly, more like surprise with a shade in it. I slammed again. The fingers vanished. The door shut. The chain rattled. The hall went quiet in the way quiet goes loud after a noise. Something hit the door. Not hard. Like a shoulder leaned for a second. Then a voice, low and ordinary. The voice you use in a store when you ask someone to hand you a box from the top shelf. That was rude, he said. I have the box, I said, before I realized I was going to. I saw your map. A pause. I pictured him tasting the fact that I had disobeyed the order to open it in a certain place. Did that make me less fun? Or more? You can set it back down, he said. I don't need you to carry anything else for me. You put a camera in my smoke detector, I said. Stupid sentence. Obvious. My brain grabbed what it could grab. He laughed once. Not a big thing. It made me want to hurt him in a way I hadn't felt yet. Not even when Marta's blood was a sheen on the road. That feels ugly to write. It felt ugly to stand in. "Come for a walk," he said, like he wanted me to admire a fresh coat of paint he'd put on the hallway. "We're wasting time." "No," I said. "You first." "You leave your phone in front of the peephole." I don't know why I said phone, not knife or gun. Maybe because the phone was how he had been inside. "You want a magic trick," he said, amused. "You want to see me without the disguise." He was still close to the door. His voice came in clear. I didn't answer. I waited. He waited. The building settled. A pipe in the wall knocked twice the way it always did before the upstairs neighbor showered. I put my face close to the door and breathed his breath through the crack, and it hit me all at once that he smelled like laundry detergent, not like alley or smoke. It was a detail from a life. It meant he washed his clothes somewhere I wouldn't think to watch. Something soft fell in front of the peephole and covered most of it, not black. The light came through in a weak gray wash. I didn't move. I let my eyes adjust. A rectangle shape, a case, a screen. He had done it. He had set his phone there, blank side out. It was either honest or a trick I wasn't clever enough to see. "Step back," he said. "Count to 20, then open. We go for a walk, or we do it the other way. But we do it." I didn't count. I stood with the screwdriver and breathed. I pictured him 1 foot from the door, his head tipped, shoulder angled. I pictured the scar and the cap and the too clean smell and the list in the box with names circled. Marta, Malik, Tara, Doug, Parker, attendant, lock guy, the one who always sees, the night attendant, flat hands, the bowl of keys under his counter when the landlord forgot and left them there, and everyone pretended not to see. He saw everyone. He saw me cross the lobby with a box. He saw Marta come in late and alone. He saw Malik with his headphones. He could put a note in a mailbox without a camera catching him because he was the person who checked the camera when it glitched. But the scar, I had seen it earlier where? The morning we cut open a busted pallet, Parker's thumb had a puckered slice near the base. He'd cursed and wrapped it with tape. Weeks later, it would have healed smooth like this. It didn't matter, I told myself, who it was yet. The finger and the lockpick belonged to a person who wanted me to leave my apartment. I took the chain off and opened the door slow. His phone stayed braced in the peephole like a plug. The hall looked like itself. No one in it. The night attendant's desk was out of view down the elevator bank. Tara's doormat sat straight. A grocery flyer had been slid under 3C's door and stuck there like a tongue. I stepped into the hall and closed my door behind me, but didn't lock it. If I needed to run, I didn't want to dig for a key. I looked right. Empty. Left. Empty. The air tasted like dust. "Down," he said from somewhere I couldn't place. "You know the route." His voice had changed shape, smaller and farther, like talking into a jar. He had moved and I hadn't noticed. That made my stomach flip. I walked. I didn't hurry. Running made you loud. I passed the stairwell door and pictured the carved word below. Listen. I did. Nothing but the building's thick throat. The elevator chimed and opened and no one came out. I took the stairs. On the 4th landing, a new scratch in the paint. On the 3rd, a heel scuff that looked fresh. On the second, an old grocery receipt curled in the corner like a shed skin. I kept going. In the lobby, the night attendant looked up without looking up. He lived with eyes that did two things at once. He raised a hand. I raised mine back. He nodded toward the front doors like a reflex, and then he glanced at the side hall that led to the service entrance and the old school's basement door, just for a second, like people do when they're trying not to give away a secret. That glance landed in my body like a tack. He either knew or wanted me to think he knew. He either was no part of this and was trying to help, or he was exactly part of this, and the help was a shepherding. I went left, toward the service door. He did not move. He let me go with the blank look people wear when they sing quietly to themselves to calm down. The service door was propped with a wedge. That wasn't usual. The wedge looked like it had been whittled from a chair leg. I had a short, stupid thought about who brings a wedge, who plans like that, and then I went through because I was already committed to the path. The hall behind the door smelled cold and old. The light was worse than in the basement I'd been in earlier, because this one was trying to be good and failing. You could see the dust in the air. The lockers with the coughing furnace were 2 turns away. He texted. Right. Then left. Then the gray door. I followed. It felt like a trick you could feel working and couldn't stop. The gray door had a new lock plate. You could tell because the screws were clean and not painted over. I touched the plate and it clicked warm under my fingertip. I hated myself for noticing everything too late. I slid the screwdriver into the 3rd hole under the latch like he'd taught me and didn't turn. I knocked. It was a dumb gesture. I didn't know what I wanted from it. Maybe I wanted whoever was in there to knock back so I could feel less alone. Something thumped once on the other side. Not a knock. A body shifting weight. My grip tightened. I turned the screwdriver. The latch gasped and gave. I opened the door and saw him. Not the him I had pictured. Not a stranger in a mask. Not the night attendant. Not even Parker. Doug stood with his back to the room, hands on a table, shoulders hitched toward his ears the way they get when someone knows they are about to be seen the wrong way. He turned slow. His face wore the scolded look he used when someone stacked boxes too high. His eyes had blood in the whites. In his right hand, a box cutter with the blade out. The handle was red. Of course it was. The scar at the base of his thumb was a shiny half moon. It took a second for my head to make him into the person from the door. A second for my stomach to drop again. New. This was stupid, I thought. And then the thought stopped, because he smiled and it didn't reach his eyes, and everything in me recognized it all at once. That smile had sat on the other side of my notes. That smile had watched me read them. That smile had picked out the lemons. "Hey, kiddo," he said. I took a step back that I tried to make look like I meant to. He lifted his hands like, "Take it easy." The box cutter made a small cut in the air. "Not what you expected," he said. "I get that a lot." "I expected a person," I said. My mouth went dry and the words felt like they were walking on sand. He looked pleased. "Thanks," he said. "Most people don't get to the heart of things. They get stuck on names." "Doug," I said, because it was his name. His was a name I'd said 100 times at work. It didn't fit here. It hung wrong, like a coat on the wrong body. "Don't do that," he said gently. "Don't make it small. We had something bigger going. We had nothing." I should have said that. It would have been the right line. But lines weren't what mattered. The room mattered. The corners he kept talking about were here. A folding table, rolls of tape, a stack of old promotional posters for the store with dates that had passed, a crate of keys with tags, a little TV set on a milk crate showing 3 camera feeds side by side, jerky from a cheap connection, the lobby desk, the alley bins, the back stairs. The night attendant's head nodded on one feed. A spider web vibrated in the corner of another like a hand. "You have to be tired," he said. "Come sit." "Where?" I said, just to say anything. My mouth kept doing that, buying me seconds. He nodded at a chair. "There." "I'll stand," I said. I bent my knees a little and felt how slow my legs were, like I hadn't slept in months, which was true. "You hungry?" he said, almost kind. "I can get you something from the break room." He tipped his head toward a little mini fridge. They throw away so much. Something in my face must have changed. He saw it and smiled wider. "Oh," he said. "You thought the world would stop wasting because you were in trouble." He shook his head. "It's still what it is." He was doing the thing from the messages, turning a regular complaint into a point about me. It sounded sane and sick at the same time. I wanted to make him stop talking. I wanted to make him talk more so he would forget his hands. "What do you want?" I said. I hated that I was back to that question. He nodded like I had finally caught up. "I told you," he said. "I want you awake. I want you to feel. And now that you do, I want you to do something with it." "Like what?" I said. It wasn't a question. It was a stall. He gestured with the box cutter. "Start there," he said, and his eyes slid past me to the door, and it was only then that I heard it, the sound I hadn't heard, because all the sounds inside me were louder. Someone breathing in the corner, shallow and high. I moved my head a fraction. In the shadow behind a stack of folded tables, a leg stuck out, a shoe I knew. Tara sat on the floor with her hands cuffed behind her, a strip of tape on her mouth crooked enough to show it hadn't gone on easy. Her eyes were big and furious. She tipped her head like anger had become her bones. My skin went double. "No," I said, which was an honest word at last. It covered a lot. "Don't be dramatic," he said gently. "We're not at the end of anything. We're practicing." "What are we practicing?" I said. And his eyes lit up the way people's eyes light up when you finally ask about their hobby. "Being honest," he said. "You and me. You pretending you don't see how people get dismissed, how they disappear while you do your little loops." He lifted the box cutter and drew a shape in the air, a circle. "That's over. You're going to pick. Or not. But you're going to do it while you're looking." He pointed the box cutter at me, then at Tara. "You two think you're different," he said. "You both live by the rules you made up to protect yourselves. She thinks kindness is a currency. You think distance is. You both take and don't pay." "Shut up," Tara said behind the tape. It came out ugly. I loved her for it. He looked pleased. There you go, he said to her. There she is. I took half a step toward Tara. He tisked and shook his head, small. The box cutter made a line in the air I could almost see. I stopped. Let her go, I said. There are only so many true sentences in a room like that, and that one kept coming out of my mouth like it knew the way. You still think I'm taking something you had, he said. You don't have anything. Not here. I made this room. I picked the door. I held the keys. I decided which hallway would go dark and who would find it. Marta's name flared under my skin like a match. I made his face into her street for a second and wanted to crush it. My hand tightened on the screwdriver. You killed her, I said. Stupid. He wanted me to say his words. He wanted his work named. He rolled his eyes. If you say it like that, it's not useful. She didn't listen. You didn't insist. It was a test of you as much as her. I took another stupid step. He drew the box cutter across his palm slow and shallow, not to cut, to show. The blade caught a thread of skin and pulled. I felt it in my teeth. Don't, he said softly. I'm quicker than I look. He wasn't wrong. He had always been quicker than he looked. He had always been right there, moving at that speed people miss because it isn't fast. It's just continuous. He had been at my shoulder in 100 rooms. He had brushed past me to get to the break room, and I had leaned out of his way. He had said kiddo, and made me smaller with his mouth, and I had let him, because I wanted ours. I know the police, I said. I handed them your camera. They'll be here. This is the only place that makes sense for you to be, because you need a room like this. You can't do it in the open. I said it to buy time. I also said it because it was true. He nodded like we were in a training. Good. See? You're learning. He angled his head and I heard the building's belly again, the elevator's stomach, the hall's throat. Somewhere far, a door opened. You can tell the difference between an outside door and an inside door by the air it lets in. This one was inside. They won't get here before we finish, he said. I took a lot of time to understand timing. I know what you can do in 5 minutes and what you can't. I know when the attendant stands to stretch and when he checks the toilet down the hall and how long his back is turned. He tapped the little TV with the box cutter. The attendant's chair sat empty on the feed. The alley camera showed only condos of trash. The back stairs showed no feet. How many? I said, and I hated myself for sounding like a child asking how long a car ride will be. How many minutes? He looked at his watch. Of course he wore a watch. 3, he said. Maybe 4. Depends if the elevator stops. I looked at Tara. Her eyes were steady now, past the fury. She made a small movement with her head, like she was shifting her weight to one side. It took me a second to see that her right knee was tucked under her a little, like she had been working at the zip on the cuff with the bone of her wrist and needed to brace. I moved half an inch so I blocked Doug's view of her leg. He didn't notice. Men who think they're conducting an orchestra forget the audience moves. What do you want me to do? I said, because if he had to tell me, he had to keep the picture in his head still while his mouth moved, and that gave us both fractions of seconds. Pick, he said. Pick the shape of the night. He gestured with the box cutter, a little flourish. We can pull this out like taffy and make it thin, or we can cut it clean. He smiled at me the way he smiled at me when he wanted me to take the Sunday restock. I'm flexible. I don't understand, I said. I did. I wanted him to talk. He sighed, theatrical. Fine. Walk the corridor. It's the same way everywhere. You go left, I do one thing. You go right, I do another. You stay, I do a third. No matter what, you learn. The world shifts the way I told you it could if you stopped pretending. He had rehearsed that. Maybe he'd even said it aloud to an empty room. I pictured him here with the spider web and the TV, practicing his lines. That should have made him small. It didn't. Practice is how people make themselves strong. Left does what? I said. He smiled. Left makes me quick. And right, I said. Right makes me careful. And if I stay, I said. He tilted his head again. Then I cut you, he said, like he was offering me a taste of a cake. But not where you think. My skin tried to walk off me. I thought of all the girls and women who had ever been told to choose the shape of harm. I hated that he had made me a part of that sentence. Tara made a sound behind the tape. It wasn't a word. It was a register, low and steady, the way you calm a dog. I took a breath that tried to carry hers. I looked down at my hands. The rubber band on my wrist had cut a thin line into my skin. The screwdriver's handle had warmed and left a crescent in my palm. A small fact. I could still feel my fingers. Okay, I said. Left. I moved one step left and then I moved fast. Not away, not toward him, but straight at the little TV on the crate. And I kicked it as hard as I could. It tipped and fell and hit the floor with a sound like a plate. The spiderweb flashed and was gone. The box with the keys clattered and spilled. He flinched for real then. Not fear. Startle. The box cutter came up. I threw the screwdriver at his face. I missed by an inch on purpose. He moved his head a hair to avoid it, and that was enough. Tara slammed her knee into the crate, and it skittered and hit his shin. He swore like a man stubbing his toe. I went low, the way self-defense videos tell you to do, and your body argues with until the moment comes when it doesn't. I wrapped both hands around his ankle and pulled. He went over hard. The box cutter skittered. It made a sound I would hear in sleep for months. He got his knee under him fast, faster than I wanted him to be. He swung. His fist hit my shoulder like a chair. The rubber band snapped on my wrist and stung. He crawled for the box cutter. I threw my body at his hand, and we both felt the blade at once, the way the air around it feels thinner. It cut my palm. The cut didn't hurt yet. It only felt cold. He snarled, a little boy sound, and shoved his shoulder into me, and I slid on old dust. Tara was on her feet. I didn't see her get there. I just felt the air change. She hit him with the chair. Not fancy. Not the way it looks on TV. She brought it down on his back like she was splitting kindling. A leg snapped. He sucked in a breath that whistled. I pushed off the floor and grabbed the nearest thing with weight, the crate with the keys, and I brought it up and then down on his hand. Bones make a soft sound when you hurt them. The box cutter came loose and spun. I kicked it under the table. He made another sound. He twisted and drove his shoulder into Tara's legs. She went over backward and hit hard, head and then body, and didn't get up for a second too long. The tape on her mouth ripped when her face hit and went half off. She gasped. Her eyes had white around them like chipped enamel. Doug scrambled on all fours like a roach, fast, awful. He slammed his arm into my knees and I stumbled against the wall. He got his hand on my ankle and pulled and bit. His teeth went through the denim. I screamed and tasted metal. He got his weight under him in that way big men do when they decide to stand. He punched my thigh and it lit like a match. He looked pleased. He grabbed my jacket at the shoulder and pulled. The nylon tore and the sound made my stomach turn, because it was the same sound the box cutter made through tape. I don't know what corner of my body I used when I kicked him in the throat. I didn't know I was capable of that angle. It landed not hard enough, and hard enough. He made a sound like a cough turned inside out and dropped to a knee. His hand went to his neck. He looked shocked. He had counted everything but this, and it made his face baby smooth for a second. I hit him again in the same place with the heel of my hand, the way you're told to. The way you practice on pads you think you'll never meet for real. He gagged and fell onto his side, grabbed for the table, found the edge, missed, found it again. I grabbed the roll of packing tape on the table, jammed the end onto my thumb, and dragged it. It stuck to itself. I swore. Tara ripped it from me and found the end like she had been born to find ends. And we both went at him with it, hands and wrists, and then ankles, and then hands again when he tore through the first layer. He fought like a man who always wins small fights. He lost this one because we were two, and we were angry. And somewhere in the building a person stood up from a chair and started to walk toward a door. We got him still. He breathed hard through his mouth and looked at me over the top of the tape. His eyes were hot and bright and sane and empty in the way countertop granite is empty. He tried to talk. The tape made a small wet sound. He worked his jaw. Spit made a bubble that burst and it felt like something breaking in me in a different place than before. Not in fear, but in a new region I didn't know I had. I leaned away. I am not proud of that. Tara said, "Phone," and I pulled mine, and it was in airplane mode because I had done that without knowing when I went downstairs. I turned it off airplane and on again, and it took a year to find a bar. I dialed 3 numbers. The line rang. The elevator in the hall opened. Footsteps came fast. I didn't hang up. I picked up the box cutter from under the table and held it like a talisman. The blade was gummy. The night attendant came through the door first, hands up, eyes wide in a good way. Behind him, the officer from earlier, the young one with the tablet, this time with a partner who looked like he had been awake for 20 years. They both saw the taped man on the floor and the 2 women standing over him. And they did the thing they do where they stop moving while their brains choose a shape for the scene. And then they chose one. And it was the right one. Guns stayed down. Hands went out. Voices got calm. The room filled with air that smelled like hot dust from the little TV that had died, and something else I didn't want to name yet. I started shaking the way you shake after a near miss on the highway. I kept shaking. Tara sat down on the floor like her knees had decided on their own and put her head on her arms and didn't cry the way I expected her to. She breathed like she'd just finished a run she hadn't trained for. They took the tape off Doug's mouth, and he made it uglier than it needed to be. He went from asking us to calm down, to shouting about how he'd been attacked, to whining about his throat, to sitting up and delivering his careful sentences about how we had misunderstood everything. He tried to look at me like we were still co-workers. I looked at the room we were in and kept my face stone. They read him the words they read, and he talked over them, and they kept reading, and he shut up like he had forgotten that was one of the rules. The night attendant stood in the doorway and kept his hands together in front of him like a kid at church. He looked like he wanted to apologize to me for living in the same building. I wanted to hug him, and didn't. Some details happened fast then. Gloves, bags, string, a camera that didn't belong to Doug, a phone that did, a roll of tape, a set of keys sorted by a person who can tell a notch from a notch when they look the same to everyone else. The carve on the stairwell photographed, the angle of the cut measured. People who do that job move quiet, like dancers. It calmed me to watch. They walked us out the way you walk someone out of a smoky room. In the lobby, the night attendant said my name once in a tone like he had watched me be many people, and found this one the most real. He said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "For what?" And he said, "For seeing it and not seeing it." And I said, "Me too," because that was the true thing. They put us on 2 different benches in a hallway that smelled like floor cleaner. They gave us water and a blanket, and the blanket made me angry because I felt like a person in a story then. And I threw it off, and then I pulled it back because I was cold. The officer with the tablet asked questions. The older one didn't say much. He watched, and I understood for the first time what it might mean to make watching a job that keeps people alive. They took my statement. I told it straight. I didn't make it pretty because it already was ugly, and ugly doesn't need help. When I got to the part where Marta's phone call went dead, my voice did a small thing it hadn't done anywhere else, and I had to stop and drink, and then keep going. I didn't cry. My body felt like it had wrung itself out earlier, and there was nothing left but salt. They took Tara's statement too. At one point she said my name and reached for my hand, and I flinched because the cut on my palm had begun to actually hurt. She frowned like she was angry I had a wound. She said, "Let me see." And I did. And she made a small disgusted sound and said to the officer, "A bandage, not a brochure, please." And I loved her again. They took Doug past us on his way out the back. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor like a child who knows he's going to be put in the car and driven somewhere he doesn't like. His mouth was a straight line that wanted to be higher. The tape had left a rash around it. I felt mean satisfaction about that, and then I felt gross for feeling it. And then I told myself I was allowed one ugly feeling, and then I stopped telling myself anything. That was the beginning of a different kind of quiet. After that, there were days that lasted the length of 2 days. People called. The landlord tried to say the building had done everything according to code. A lawyer friend of a friend said words like negligence and foreseeability, and I said, "I just want to get the cameras out of the smoke detectors." And he said, "We'll do both." Marta's mother called me and asked me to tell her daughter's last hour again, the way you ask someone to sing a song at a funeral. I did. I took each sentence slow and clean, and I didn't try to make it less. Malik's sister left a note on our lobby bulletin board with his name in thick marker and a picture of him that made him look enough like himself that it hurt. People pinned paper flowers around it. It felt like an altar and a bulletin board at once. The night attendant stood by it for whole stretches of his shift like a guard. I think he was guarding himself. Parker cried in the back room at work when I told him, and then he got angry and boxed 24 cans too hard and cut his thumb in the same place he had cut it before, and said a long string of words that made me want to put my hand on his shoulder, and then not. He asked to see the scar on my palm, and I showed him, and he kissed his teeth in an affectionate way that made me feel strange, and I realized maybe I didn't know him at all. Doug's name got turned into a curse, and then a joke, and then an HR notice. The store put out a statement about community and safety, and then cut shifts, because that's what they do. I moved out. Of course I moved out. The landlord tried to keep my deposit. The lawyer friend wrote a letter that fit on one page, and he changed his mind. I packed fast, and then slow. The lemon stain on the table would not come up. I left the table and the stain on the curb with a sign that said free, and a piece of me that was petty hoped someone would feel weird eating at it, and then I hated that piece, and then I gave it a seat because ignoring it had fed it. Tara helped me carry boxes, and then I helped her change her lock again, even though we both knew locks are a suggestion. We didn't talk about the chair leg breaking. We didn't talk about her knee bruise that bloomed like a lake and took a week to drain. We didn't talk about how I had said it could be her, how she had still made soup. We talked about plant care and landlord tricks, and the best way to get stains out of cheap carpet, and how to not become a person who flinches at every knock, and how to let yourself flinch anyway sometimes. She took the rubber band off her wrist and snapped it against the inside of her arm once, and I knew what she was doing, and I nodded and didn't say anything. The police came back with questions and with facts. They told me about a storage unit with boxes labeled in a code that wasn't hard to crack if you thought about the map and the circles. They told me about photos printed at a pharmacy at the edge of the city where no one knew him because no one needed to. They told me about a cloud account that had years in it. They didn't tell me everything, and I didn't ask for everything because the container of my head had a volume, and I could feel the water line. They told me enough to let me know that the 2 murders they had focused on were parts of a larger picture, and that made the air go thin and then thicker. Some of the pictures in the unit were old, older than me. Some were of people whose names no one would ever carve in paint. I tried to think of the math of that, and then I stopped because math without answer keys makes me mean. They asked me if I wanted to be in the room when they asked him certain questions. I said no, because I didn't want to hear his voice put on new clothes. They asked if I wanted to write a statement for sentencing. I said yes, and then I put the blank paper on the table and sat in front of it, and it felt like homework from a class I didn't take. And I got up and washed a dish that wasn't dirty, and then I sat down again and wrote. I wore a red jacket because it made me easy to see. You use that as a reason to take. That is not a reason. If you need a reason, use your own. You killed my friend and a man I barely knew, and you put my life in a hallway, and then expected me to thank you for the lesson. I am awake. Not because you wanted me to be, but because I have to keep living. You don't get the credit for that. It wasn't clever. It didn't use words like closure. I turned it in anyway, and the clerk nodded and said, "Thank you," like I had mailed a package, and she would make sure it got to the right place. The trial happened in the way those things happen, slow, then fast around the corners. I didn't go every day. When I did go, I sat on a bench and watched men carry folders. I watched women take notes. I watched Doug look bigger and smaller depending on the light. Sometimes he looked like a manager I'd had once at a different job who wore too much cologne. Sometimes he looked like a boy who had fallen off his bike and didn't know yet the scrape would scar. I felt bad about that thought. I stopped feeling bad. I paid attention. The jury listened like they were trying to be good, and I loved them for it in a way that made me feel silly and human at once. The night attendant came and sat next to me one day, and we didn't talk. We watched the room behave. After, he said, "I still see every door." I said, "Me too." He said, "I got a different job." I said, "Good." And I meant it in a way I hadn't learned how to mean before. Parker sent me a link to a fund for Malik's sister. I gave money I didn't have and didn't tell anyone. The lock guy texted me out of nowhere. Tara must have given him my number and said, "You want a deadbolt on the new place? On the house?" I said, "No, thanks. I'm going to learn the sound of my door as it is." He wrote back a thumbs up and a sentence about how he liked the way good wood knocks, and I felt a small friendship with him then. The kind you get with a person who lives mostly in their hands. I wore the red jacket once on purpose. I went to the corner store. The kid with the skateboard wasn't there that day, which made me sad in a way that surprised me. The clerk rang me up and said, "Nice color." And I said, "Thanks," and didn't check behind me to see who was in line. When I got outside, I laughed once, sharp, because the sky was doing that thing where it looks like it's closer than usual, and I was alive under it. And that felt like an indecent luxury. I stood there anyway and let it be indecent. People asked me about the carved word. They wanted it to be a sign like in a story. It was a sign. It said listen, and I hadn't. Now I do. The building painted over it, and it bled back through, faint. That happens when you cut too deep. The paint covers, but the wound remembers. I walked back there once with Tara, in the middle of a day that felt like a normal day from far away, and we stood on the landing and looked at the flat new paint layered over what we knew was there. A woman with a stroller came down and said, "Excuse me," and we moved and said, "Sorry," even though we didn't need to be sorry, and that small exchange felt like nothing, and like exactly the kind of corner I have to keep seeing. At night I still check the peephole. It's a habit now. The glass makes a circle of the hall, and I peer into it, and sometimes there is a package, and sometimes there is a flyer, and sometimes there is nothing. I let the nothing be what it is. I don't tape it over. If I see a finger one day, I will not open. That's not a vow made out of fear. It's just a rule I made for myself that doesn't pretend to be a rule for anyone else. It has a small piece in it. There are other rules. I hold the door. Not because I'm scared of what happens if I don't, but because I'm choosing to be a person in a doorway with another person there. I make eye contact and then I don't, depending on how the air between us feels. Because that is a language too, and I'm learning it. I don't count lemons anymore. I pick one and then another, and if one is bad, I live. I am not cured. That isn't a thing. The part of me that liked the chair under the handle still likes it. The part of me that wants to make a map and draw circles and put names in them still wants to. I let her draw sometimes. Then I tear the paper and throw it away, and I don't reach back in the trash for it. On the day he was sentenced, the judge read something about harm and time, and then said a number of years that sounded like a math problem I wouldn't pass. People in the room nodded like they were looking at a graph. I looked at Doug's hands. They were clean and empty. He didn't look at me. He had become his own hallway. That is maybe the only mercy I can find in any of it. I don't live there. Not in him. Not in the room he made. After, I went home and sat on the floor with my back against the dresser the way I had that night with the lemon. I put my hand on the wood and felt the old gouge where I shoved it against the door. I pressed my palm to it. It fit. The cut on that palm had healed into a half smile. It made a small shiny patch when I opened my hand wide. I flexed my fingers and it pulled and then released, like a door that sticks and then doesn't. Tara knocked. Not loud, not polite, just normal. I didn't flinch. I stood and opened. She held up a big plastic bag full of limes. They were cheaper, she said. We can squeeze them and pretend we meant to. We stood in my kitchen and rolled limes on the counter to make them give their juice, and took turns with the cheap metal squeezer until it hurt our hands, and then we switched hands and kept going. We didn't drink. We just stood there with the green and the sound of the press and the small pool of sweet sour on our tongues, and we were alive, and no one was watching us who had a right to our fear. Outside, a car door shut. A pipe in the wall knocked twice. The building breathed. We did too. Sometimes I still wake in the middle of a night that isn't special with the smell of metal in my head. I listen. The rooms make their own noises. They aren't talking to me. That's a relief. I close my eyes again, and I don't pray, and I don't make deals, and I don't bargain with a man who is not in the room. I hold my own breath, and then I let it go. I can do that now. That is the thing you don't notice when you don't need to. You notice it after. A week after the sentencing, a letter came with no return address. My name written in block letters. The old flutter started in my chest and then stopped because I made it stop. I sat at the table and looked at it, and then I opened it with a butter knife because I'll be damned if I let a fear pull my hand to a blade. Inside was a single page torn from a notebook. I saw you on the news, it said, in handwriting I didn't know. Nice jacket. Under that, a smile that tried to be shaky and failed. For a second the room tilted again. Then it righted. I put the page under the leg of the table that wobbled. It steadied the table. I ate my dinner there with the wobble gone. The leg left an imprint on the paper overnight. A square. In the morning I threw the paper away. I didn't reach in the trash for it. I am telling this plain because that is the only way I know how to carry it without it carrying me. There were brutal pieces. He cut people open and watched them leave. And then he watched me watch the places where they had been, and called that teaching. He left notes that seemed small, and then widened into rooms. He took a lot. I am not giving him more by using nice words to dress up what he did. I'm not going to make him interesting. He was thorough and he was patient, and he liked the way fear makes time slow. He was not a genius. He was a man with keys. When I put my key in the lock now, I listen to the sound it makes. It is a deep click that feels like biting into hard candy. Once a week, I don't lock it for an hour in the day while I'm home, just to remind myself that the door is a door and not a question. I sit with it open a crack and read the stupid free magazines they leave in the lobby, and I do not look at the peephole. Neighbors walk by and pretend not to see into my slice of room because we are all polite here, and that politeness is not the problem. The problem is when a person uses it like a rug to sweep their work under. I am learning the difference. It is not a straight line. It is a messy loop with corners. My red jacket hangs on the back of the chair again. Sometimes I wear it. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I drape it over the chair and look at it, and let it be a thing that is red and loud and mine. The color is the same as the day I bought it. The city is not. I am not. I won't pretend otherwise just to make it a better story. I don't have to. I lived. That is not a moral. It is a fact. I can hear the building in my head the way you hear the ocean after a day at the beach. The hiss and knock and sigh. It used to mean I wasn't alone and I didn't know it. Now it means I'm awake and I know it. That's harder. It's also the only thing that feels honest. I still sleep with the light on sometimes. I don't apologize for that. When I turn it off, on purpose, without a stool under the handle, and sink into the dark that belongs to me, it is not bravery. It is not triumph. It is not the part you've been waiting for. It is me in a room with a door that opens and closes because I tell it to, breathing like a person, counting nothing.